Snow blanketed the earth, a clean slate I desperately needed. It was January, and the Alaskan wilderness was my last-ditch effort to hold my family together. The trip to a secluded cabin was supposed to be a reset button for the fractures that had appeared in our lives. My wife, Anna, and I communicated mostly through our daughter, Chloe, a painfully quiet 7-year-old who had started drawing unsettling pictures of shadowy men. My recent job loss had cast a pall over our home, and the silence in our life had grown teeth. This vacation, this forced proximity in the heart of nowhere, was meant to either heal us or break us completely. We arrived late, the headlights cutting a frantic path through a disorienting curtain of snow. The cabin was just as advertised, modest, wooden, with a curl of smoke from the chimney, promising a warmth we hadn't felt in months. The long drive had been a masterclass in passive aggression, but as we unloaded our things and gathered around the crackling fireplace, the ice seemed to thaw, just a little. The sheer overwhelming silence of the forest pressed in on us. But for that one night, it felt like a protective barrier, not a threat. We were safe in our little box, the world locked out. The following morning dawned bright and bitterly cold. The sunlight on the snow was so intense it hurt to look at, a pristine, unforgiving beauty. After breakfast, I suggested a hike, desperate to fill the hours with activity instead of silence. Anna agreed, her expression unreadable. We walked through the woods, the only sound the rhythmic crunch of our boots in the snow. It was Chloe, who saw it first. Tucked away in a clearing, half swallowed by snowdrifts, was an old, dilapidated cabin. Its roof bowed, its windows were dark voids, and a single child-sized chair sat overturned on the porch, as if knocked over in a hurry. An inexplicable sense of dread washed over me. It felt like we were intruding on a place of immense sorrow. "Daddy, the sad house," Chloe whispered, clutching my hand. I tried to sound cheerful. "Just an old hunting shack, sweetie." I knocked on the door, a foolish, automatic gesture. The hollow sound it made seemed to confirm the place's emptiness. "They'd been abandoned for years," I declared, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. The place felt suffocatingly dark, the pocket of shadow that the brilliant sun couldn't penetrate. We left quickly, the image of the sad, empty house following us back that evening. The fragile peace we had found was shattered. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the Alaskan twilight bled across the snow. After a strained dinner, I was cleaning the dishes when I saw him through the kitchen window. A man, a dark shape against the snow, stumbling through the trees at the edge of our property. My first reaction was a jolt of anger. An intruder, a violation of the solitude I had paid for. "Anna, stay here with Chloe," I said, my voice low and tense. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. "Can I help you?" I called out, my voice sharp. The man staggered towards the light, and I saw he was in a bad way, shivering, his face gaunt and his eyes wide with a frantic energy. He collapsed on the porch steps. Against my better judgment, I helped him inside. My family needed this peace. We didn't need a complication. We sat him by the fire. He introduced himself as Daniel. He said he was a writer, seeking solitude in a nearby cabin to finish a novel. He told us a wild story about being followed, not just by one person but by several. "Figures in black," he said, his hand shaking as he held a mug of tea. "They don't make a sound. They just watch from the trees. I saw them circling my cabin. I think they want to drive me mad." He stared into the fire, but his eyes seemed to be looking at something else, something only he could see. "They make you see things, hear things. They twist what's real." Anna looked at me, her eyes wide with alarm. My own father had suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, a secret I had kept from her. Daniel's words, his frantic energy, were terrifyingly familiar. I told him he could stay the night, but my mind was racing. Was this man genuinely in danger, or was he unstable, a threat to my family? The next morning, after a tense breakfast, Daniel insisted we help him find his cabin so he could gather his things and leave the area. The storm had passed, but outside, I noticed a second set of footprints circling our cabin. They were mine. I had been up half the night, unable to sleep, pacing the perimeter, checking the locks, my old anxieties flaring to life. Daniel pointed to them. "See, they were here." He saw what he wanted to see. He led us to the abandoned cabin from the day before. "This is it," he announced. "But it's a wreck," Anna said, confused. Daniel just stared at it. "It wasn't like this yesterday," he whispered, his face a mask of confusion and terror. "They did this. They're trying to erase me." He turned and ran, not into the cabin, but away, into the deep woods, screaming about how we were part of it, how we were helping them. We just stood there, stunned and deeply unnerved. That night was our last. The vacation was a failure. The silence was back, heavier and more menacing than ever. We were all on edge, jumping at every creak of the old house. Around midnight, as a new storm began to howl outside, the knocking started, a soft, deliberate knock at the front door. We all froze. We huddled in the living room staring at the door. "It's him," Anna whispered. He came back. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Then we heard whispers, faint sibilant sounds, like the wind, but with a cadence that sounded like words. words I couldn't understand but felt in my bones. It sounded like my father's desperate muttering in his final years. "Make it stop," I muttered, my hands clenched into fists. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. "Go away," I yelled, my voice cracking. "We're armed." The knocking and whispering continued, relentless, burrowing into my skull. Was it real, or was it the old family sickness, the fracture in my own mind, finally breaking open? I couldn't tell. Anna was crying softly, holding Chloe, who was staring at the door with wide, blank eyes. Finally, I snapped. I lunged for the door, flinging it open, roaring into the storm, the poker raised high. There was nothing there. Absolutely nothing. Just the swirling snow and the howling wind, the knocking, the whispers, they had all been in my head. The sound of the wind, the rattling of a loose shutter, amplified by my own inherited fear. I turned back to my family, my face a mess of terror and shame. Anna was staring at me, not the door, her expression one of dawning horror, as if she was seeing the real monster for the first time. The rest of the night passed in a dreadful, suffocating silence. We didn't sleep. At dawn, we packed our things and fled. The drive away was completely silent. The beautiful, snowy landscape now seemed like a sterile white room in a hospital. As we drove, I glanced back at the cabin. It looked so ordinary, so peaceful. There were no figures in the trees, no lingering threat. The horror wasn't in the cabin. It was in my blood, in my mind. I had brought it with me, and it had finally shown itself. I looked at Anna and she wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked at Chloe. In the rearview mirror, she was holding one of her drawings. It showed our family standing outside the cabin, but next to me was a tall, shadowy man, and his hand was on my shoulder. The vacation hadn't healed us. It had simply shown us the fracture that was too deep to ever repair. I always thought winter was peaceful, the kind of profound quiet you don't get in the summer when everything buzzes with life. Snow muffles sound, it turns the world soft and slow, it buries the past. That's why I convinced my family to spend a week in a remote Alaskan cabin. My wife Sarah had been distant since her mother's passing, and I thought the isolation, the sheer, cleansing emptiness of it all, might help us reconnect. Might help our 10-year-old son Leo see his mother smile again. The cabin was advertised as a rustic wilderness retreat, which was a polite way of saying it was old and miles from anything resembling civilization. We arrived as a blizzard was beginning to brew, the sky a bruised purple-gray. The cabin was just as the pictures showed, a sturdy log structure with a wide porch and a stone chimney puffing out a welcome stream of smoke. The drive had been tense, the silence in the car a heavy blanket. But as we stepped inside, into the immediate, embracing warmth of a wood-burning stove, some of that tension seemed to melt away. The air smelled of cedar and wood smoke. Sarah even managed a small, tired smile as Leo ran from room to room, his excitement echoing in the cozy space. That first night, we felt a flicker of hope, sealed away by the growing storm. The world and its sorrows felt distant, and we felt safe, a tiny island of warmth in an ocean of cold the next morning. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. The sun shone with a fierce, cold brilliance on a landscape of sculpted snow. After breakfast we ventured out for a walk. The air was so cold it felt sharp in our lungs, but the beauty was absolute. We were surrounded by a cathedral of pines under a piercingly blue sky. It was on this walk, about a mile from our cabin, that we found it. Nestled in a grove of skeletal birch trees was another cabin, much older and in a state of severe decay. Its roof was caved in on one side, and a dark, gaping hole showed where the door used to be. A palpable aura of malice radiated from it, a cold that was deeper than the winter air. It felt wrong, like a wound in the pristine landscape. "Stay back," Leo Sarah said, her voice tight, pulling our son close. I stepped forward, driven by a morbid curiosity. The silence here was different, not peaceful, but predatory. Peeking inside I saw only darkness and the faint outline of broken furniture. But there was something else. Scratched into the wooden floor, over and over again, was a single, frantic word: hunger. A wave of nausea washed over me. "Let's go," I said, my voice strained. "This place gives me the creeps." We hurried away, but I felt unseen eyes following us from the cabin's empty sockets until we were out of sight. As twilight fell, painting the snow in shades of blood orange and deep violet, the unease from our discovery lingered. We ate dinner in near silence, the cozy atmosphere of the previous night gone. Later, as Sarah and Leo were reading by the fire, I stepped onto the porch. The snow had started again, gentle flakes drifting down in the gloaming. It was then that I saw a figure stumbling through the trees. A man dressed in dark, inadequate clothing was moving with a desperate, exhausted energy. My heart pounded in this isolation. The stranger was an anomaly, a threat, but he looked like he was about to collapse. "Sarah, call the ranger station," I yelled, grabbing a heavy blanket from the couch and rushing out to him. By the time I reached him, he had fallen to his knees in the snow. We brought him inside, half carrying him to the fire. He was emaciated, his skin stretched tight over his bones, and his eyes held a wild, terrified look. His lips were blue, and His body shook with violent shivers. Sarah held a mug of hot broth to his mouth, which he drank greedily. He told us his name was Daniel. He was a historian, he said, who had come to the area to research local folklore, staying in a small cabin he had rented for the winter. His story came out in ragged gasps. "It knows I'm here," he whispered, his eyes darting towards the windows. "I saw them last night, the hunger it walks in the storm." He claimed he wasn't being followed by men but by things that looked like men from a distant store, gaunt figures clad in black, who moved through the deep snow without making a sound. "They're not human," he insisted, his voice cracking. "They are the memory of starvation. The legend calls them the Wendigo, but it's not quite right. They are the physical embodiment of the forest's endless winter hunger. They follow the scent of warmth, of life. They want to make you as empty as they are." I tried to rationalize it. The man was hypothermic, likely hallucinating, but his terror felt chillingly real. He described how he'd fled his cabin when they began to circle it. Their silent vigil and unbearable pressure. He ran, blindly, through the storm until he saw a light, a beacon of life in the dead world. We let him stay the night, his fearful muttering a constant, unnerving presence in the quiet cabin. The next morning we agreed to take him back to his cabin. The snow outside was marked with a strange trail. Our footprints from the day before were there, but overlaying them was another set of tracks. They were long and narrow, like a man's, but they were pressed impossibly deep into the snow, and at the edge of each footprint, the snow was melted and refrozen into a delicate black ice. They circled our cabin, again and again. Daniel saw them and visibly paled. "They know," he breathed. We found his cabin the same decrepit ruined structure we had discovered the day before. The word hunger was still visible on the floor. "This is it," he said, his voice flat. He walked inside without hesitation, into the darkness. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice changing, becoming hollow and resonant. "You brought your warmth, your life. You woke the hunger. Now it will follow you." Before we could react, he simply vanished into the shadows of the ruin. We backed away slowly, then turned and ran. The forest's silence now screaming with menace. Our last night was a waking nightmare. We barricaded the door and windows, but we knew it was useless. As the storm returned with a vengeance, the knocking began. It wasn't a human knock. It was a sharp, rhythmic tapping, like bone striking wood, and it came from all sides of the cabin at once. Then the whispers started, carried on the wind, insidious voices that sounded like our own deepest fears. Sarah's mother, calling her name, my father, disappointed in me. Then a new sound, a low, guttural growling from right outside the door, the sound of a vast, empty stomach. I grabbed the emergency flare gun, the only weapon we had. In a moment of sheer panic, as the main door began to splinter inward, I fired it through the window. The brilliant red flare illuminated the scene outside for a horrifying second. Standing there, just feet from our porch, were three figures. They were impossibly tall and thin, their limbs elongated and skeletal. Their skin was the color of frostbitten flesh, and their faces were hollow sockets and gaping mouths, twisted in a rictus of eternal starvation. They weren't wearing black coats. Their bodies were shrouded in shadow itself. The light and sound from the flare made them recoil, and they dissolved back into the swirling snow. We spent the rest of the night huddled in the center of the room, listening to the storm and the scraping sounds that circled the cabin until dawn. We left the moment the sun rose, not even bothering to pack. We threw our bags in the car and sped away, the tires spinning on the ice. As we rounded the first bend, I looked back at the cabin. It looked peaceful, almost picturesque in the morning light. But as my eyes drifted to the woods, I saw them. The three figures were standing silently among the trees, motionless. They were no longer watching the cabin. They were watching our car. They were watching us. We hadn't escaped. We had just given the hunger a new scent to follow. And as we drove towards a civilization that suddenly felt fragile and illusory, I knew, with a certainty that froze my soul, that sooner or later, they would catch up. Snow blanketed the earth, painting a picture of perfect, freezing desolation. It was January, and the frigid Alaskan wilderness promised a vacation unlike any we'd ever taken. My family, Dad, Mom, my younger sister Kyle, and me, 17, Sam, had decided to spend a week in a secluded snow cabin deep in the woods. The promise of undisturbed nature, roaring fires, and fresh air was too tempting to resist, a balm for the quiet tensions that had been simmering between my parents for months. We arrived late on the first night, headlights piercing the dense, falling snow as we pulled up to the wooden cabin. The place was modest but charming, with thick plumes of smoke already curling from its chimney and long crystalline icicles hanging from the eaves like frozen fangs. The owner, a gruff man we'd only spoken to over the phone, had left it warm for us. The drive had been long and tiresome, a silent marathon of unspoken grievances, but once we unloaded our gear, stoked the fire until it roared with life, and gathered around its warmth, the chill in the air felt almost cozy. The flames crackled and popped, a cheerful sound in the oppressive silence, and the flickering light painted soft, dancing shadows on the wood-paneled walls. The profound stillness of the forest pressed against the windows, a physical weight. But inside, with mugs of hot chocolate in hand and the scent of pine in the air, everything felt safe. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were a family, sealed away from the world's problems in our little wooden bubble. The next morning, we awoke to brilliant sunlight bouncing off the snow, almost blinding in its pristine intensity. The world outside was a masterpiece of white and blue, and the arguments of yesterday felt a million miles away. After a breakfast of pancakes and bacon, we decided to explore the area. Bundling up for a hike through the surrounding forest, the air was crisp, biting at our faces with a clean, sharp sting, but the scenery was breathtaking. Towering evergreens stretched upwards towards a flawless sky, their branches heavy with a fresh blanket of snow, looking like something from a Christmas card. About halfway through our hike, as we forged a path through knee-deep powder, we stumbled across an old cabin tucked away in a small, shadowed clearing. Its roof sagged dangerously under the accumulated weight of countless winters, and the windows were dark and clouded with grime, like cataracts on dead eyes. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold ran down my spine. There was no smoke from its chimney, no footprints, no signs of life whatsoever. It looked utterly, irrevocably abandoned. Dad, ever the pragmatist, knocked on the warped wooden door, his knuckles making a hollow, dead sound. No one answered. This place has been empty for years, he concluded after peeking through a grimy window into the impenetrable darkness within. Despite the bright morning, the place felt dark, like it actively repelled the light and belonged to a different, colder world. On the rickety porch sat a single, small, rocking horse, its paint peeled but otherwise looking strangely preserved, as if a child had just stepped away from it. The sight was deeply unsettling. We left without lingering. The image of that lonely, toy horse burned into my mind by the time we got back to our cabin. The sun was dipping below the horizon. The long Alaskan twilight painted the snow in ethereal hues of pink and purple. After dinner, a simple meal of stew and bread, we settled in for the evening, the earlier unease forgotten. Mugs of coffee steamed in our hands, and the low murmur of my parents' conversation was a comforting hum. I wandered over to the door, drawn by the serene sight of snow falling in thick, silent sheets once again. Opening it, I stepped onto the porch, the cold air biting but invigorating. That's when I saw him. At first, he was just a shadow among the trees, a man in dark clothing, barely visible against the swirling snowstorm. My heart thudded against my ribs as I squinted into the forest. Was he lost? Dad, I called, my voice trembling slightly, louder than I intended. There's someone out there. Dad grabbed his heavy coat and stepped out beside me, shielding his eyes against the storm. When he saw the man, a dark shape stumbling through the drifts, he waved him over. The figure staggered closer, moving with a strange, awkward gait, almost like he wasn't used to walking in deep snow, his limbs seeming to bend at odd, unnatural angles. "Come inside before you freeze to death," Dad shouted, his voice a powerful command against the wind. He helped the man onto the porch and into the warmth of the cabin. He was gaunt, with hollow cheeks and deeply sunken eyes that darted around the room nervously, taking everything in with a rapid, predatory stillness. His black coat was soaked, and frost clung to his hair and beard like a delicate shroud. We sat him near the fire where he thawed slowly, shivering uncontrollably as he sipped the hot tea Mom made for him. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice a hoarse, grating whisper. "I thought I was done for out there." His name was Daniel, and he told us he had come to the area to spend some time alone in a cabin about a mile from ours. He'd gone hiking earlier that day, he explained, and had the unnerving sense that someone was following him. "At first, I thought it was just my imagination," he said, his gaze fixed on the mesmerizing dance of the flames. "The woods play tricks on you." But then I saw him, a man dressed in black, just like me. He didn't say anything, he just stood there watching. A silence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. None of us spoke as he continued, his voice dropping lower. I tried to shake him, but no matter which way I went, he followed. And then there were more. Two figures stepped out of the woods. I couldn't see their faces. They were too far, and the snow was coming down hard. But I knew they were looking at me. Daniel's hands trembled as he set his mug down on the hearth, the ceramic clinking loudly in the quiet room. That's when I ran. The storm got worse. I got turned around, and I couldn't find my way back. Then I saw your lights. My father, always practical, assured him that he could stay the night. "We'll help you find your cabin in the morning," he said, clapping the man on his bony shoulder. Daniel nodded, a flicker of what looked like relief, or perhaps triumph, in his sunken eyes. The next morning, the storm had eased, and we ventured out to help Daniel find his cabin. Outside, the snow was a pristine, untouched blanket, except for the trail of footprints leading to our porch. But there was something odd about them. Another set of tracks, identical to the ones Daniel had made, veered off towards the trees, circling our cabin in a wide, deliberate perimeter, like a predator sizing up its prey. Dad pointed it out, frowning. "Looks like you had a friend checking the place out," he said to Daniel, who just shrugged, his face unreadable. After about an hour of searching. Guided by Daniel's vague directions, we finally found his cabin. It was eerily, impossibly, the same abandoned one we'd seen on our hike the day before. The sagging roof, the grimy windows, even the small, creepy rocking horse on the porch. "This is it," Daniel said with a relieved smile, completely ignoring the derelict state of the building. "But this place is abandoned," Kyle said, her small voice cutting through the silence. Daniel chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "It's not much. I know, a bit of a fixer-upper, but it's home for now." He thanked us profusely, his gratitude seeming overly theatrical, and we left him to settle back in, his relief almost palpable. As we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking away from a trap that had failed to spring. That night was our last in the cabin. The vacation had been strange and unsettling, and I was looking forward to leaving the oppressive silence of the woods behind. After dinner, we gathered around the fire, the conversation light and cheerful, a forced attempt at normalcy. Around midnight, we all decided to head to bed. I had just pulled the heavy blanket over me when I heard it, a soft, deliberate knock at the front door. Knock, knock, knock. My heart leaped into my throat. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, a trick of the wind, but then it came again, louder this time, more insistent. I wasn't the only one who heard it. Soon, we were all huddled in the living room, staring at the door as if it were the gate to hell itself. "Don't open it," Dad whispered, his voice firm and laced with fear. He reached for the handgun he always carried in his luggage for emergencies. "Go away," he barked towards the door. "I have a gun, and I'll use it." The knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, more frantic, like more than one person was on the other side, throwing their weight against it. Then we could hear faint whispers, too low to make out the words, but unmistakably human, slithering through the cracks in the door. They sounded distorted, like a recording played backward. And then, a sound that chilled me to the bone, a high-pitched giggle that sounded exactly like my sister Kyle. Finally, something in Dad snapped. He flung the door open and fired 2 shots into the night. The sound was deafening in the stillness, echoing across the snowy landscape. For a moment, everything went silent. The knocking stopped, the whispering ceased. Then, from the darkness of my sister's bedroom behind us, we heard a soft, clear whisper. He missed. The rest of the night was a blur of raw, undiluted fear. We stayed up, huddled together in the living room, the gun resting on Dad's lap, his eyes wide and scanning the shadows. No more knocks came, but none of us could shake the feeling that we were no longer alone in the cabin. We were being watched from within. At the first light of dawn, we packed up in a frantic, silent rush and left the cabin. The once magical snow now felt oppressive and sinister. As Dad started the engine, the tires crunching on the icy ground, I glanced back at the cabin, half expecting to see figures standing in the trees, but there was nothing, just the snow, the trees, and the suffocating silence. I looked into the back seat to check on Kyle. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, staring out the window. When she felt my eyes on her, she turned to face me. A slow, thin smile spread across her face, a smile of predatory intelligence that didn't belong on a nut-drooled. Her eyes, which had always been a bright, innocent blue, were now dark and ancient, holding a chilling depth that wasn't hers. As we drove away, a movement in the distance caught my eye. There, standing at the edge of the clearing near the abandoned cabin, was a small figure in a familiar pink snowsuit, waving a slow, sad goodbye. It was my sister, the real Kyle, and in the back seat, the thing wearing her face let out a soft, contented sigh.